Hello and welcome to another episode of Starside Chat. I am one of your hosts, Aaron, and with me as always is Zach. How's it going, Zach?
Good. We didn't do a special fake Starside Chat intro this week.
We'll have to generate a new one.
Yeah, I know. We'll generate some new AI episodes, and they will give us ideas for intros, but...
We're doing kind of a top 5 episode today because there's not a ton of game news happening at the moment. So today we're going to be discussing our top 5 podcast games, which we'll get into a little bit later.
I've also dipped my toes into Monster Hunter Wilds, so we can talk about that as well. But yeah, top 5 podcast games this week.
Before we get to that, though, I did have 2 pieces of news I wanted to talk about. Deck, have you ever played a Katamari Damacy game?
I started one at one point. I don't remember what platform I was playing it on, but I was like, I guess I can kind of get the appeal of this, and then I just sort of fell off of it.
I really like them. There's Katamari Damacy, and then I think there's like We Love Katamari. There might be a third one. I've definitely played those 2. But there hasn't been a new one in quite a while. They've done a bunch of like re-rolls, which is just like remasters of the originals. Great music in these games and very funny writing. But apparently a trademark was seen online for something called, what was this called? I think it was called Once Upon a Katamari. Yeah, Once Upon a Katamari is trademarked by Bandai Namco. And so... people are speculating that possibly with the new Switch, we'll get a new Katamari game, which would be very cool. And possibly it would incorporate the Joy-Cons in an interesting way. Because the control method for Katamari Damacy is kind of weird. It's like tank controls, where you are pushing both analog sticks forward. And if you want to turn, you pull one of them back. And if you want to go really fast, you kind of like jiggle them. Which can get annoying sometimes. Like part of that game is like learning how to move this big ball, which is sometimes frustrating, but I'm all about this. I think a new Katamari game would be very cool. And then the other thing I wanted to discuss, did you see the trailer for this weird new Terminator 2 game?
I did not.
I don't know why this is happening, but for some reason they are making a Terminator 2 game called, it's Terminator 2D: No Fate. Coming out for PS5, PS4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, and PC. And it is a retro-style game. It looks like it's in the, it looks like it's something for like Sega, basically. Or like NES, Super NES. But it's kind of a side-scroller, and it tells the story of Terminator 2. It seems like it's kind of a run-and-gun game with some stealth elements, it seems. Like there's parts where you're playing as... the mom from that movie, and you kind of have to sneak around, but like gorgeous pixel art, which is very, very cool. I don't know, it seems like it's level based. Like there's a lot of different things in this trailer. Like there's a part where you're on a motorcycle, there's a part where you're running from a helicopter, there's like a brawling part where you're playing as Arnold Schwarzenegger. This came out of nowhere, and I don't really know why it's happening, but I love the pixel art in it. It looks very cool.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd thing to have what would have been like a movie tie-in game so many years after the fact. But yeah, it looks kind of like Contra or like a Metal Slug. But
yeah, it does look a lot like Metal Slug, yeah.
But with, like a Terminator sort of skin on everything.
I like the look of it, and hopefully if it does well, we could get more interesting games like this that are like retro movie tie-ins that are just like, it's such an interesting idea, I feel like.
Yeah, there was a long time where like a movie tie-in game or like a licensed game was like a sin. It was terrible and nobody wanted it. And now it's like, well, we have people who can make good games and they're not bound by like, oh, you have to do this in like 2 years and rush this thing out to coincide with the release of a movie. So they can take a property and sort of, take their time and make something interesting with it. And I don't know, maybe the great turnaround of the licensed game is upon us.
It would be cool. Should we move on to the top 5 podcast games?
Well, I was going to say maybe we should give it a mention because it's the only other piece of news that sort of happened this last week that people were talking about. But WB Games did shut down Monolith Productions. Obviously, there's like a lot of nostalgia for like the Lord of the Rings, like Shadow of War games.
Oh, yeah.
And that Nemesis system that they had made. And I guess they had patented that system, which is why like everybody, when those games came out, were like, oh, this is going to be like the hot new thing that everybody's going to want to put in their games. Well, apparently they patented that. I guess I didn't realize that at the time, but they have that patent for that system until like 2035. And now the studio that owns it is gone. So
that's crazy.
It is insane that would have happened. But they're also, I guess they were working on a Wonder Woman game. And I had no idea that was even in the works. But I guess it was a thing that was out there. Maybe people knew about. But WB Games has mishandled so many things. Like they did Suicide Squad, killed the Justice League. That game did not do well. I mean, so I think there's a lot of anger and disappointment about this news. Not just because we've lost another studio that sort of has a lot of, nostalgia for the games that they've made, but it's just more layoffs and the games industry. But so I guess that's bummer news, but let's be excited about games and talk about podcast games.
Zach, well, how would you describe, let's define this. What is a good podcast game?
I would say, to me, it's something that is not super story driven because you don't want to be having to pause your podcast for like dialogue and conversation.
Exactly.
And it's probably also something that's not so super action packed that like you play for about 20 minutes and then you realize you haven't heard a word that they've said on the podcast because you've had to like zone in on like the action that's happening on the screen.
I would even go a step farther than that and say it's a game. It's a type of game where you could play it on mute if you wanted to. Because like you don't really need to be listening to sound cues because what you're really listening to is the podcast. And you're right. It's one where the game can't like make you lock in, as they say these days, where you need to, it's like a kind of a chill vibe where you're kind of just, it almost is like muscle memory, what you're doing. And you're really just like enjoying the podcast. Yeah.
You're sort of just occupying your eyes and hands while listening to something. And what you're listening to is sort of the main event. You're just sort of twiddling your thumbs, but in a, more interesting way, I guess.
I guess, should we also shout out podcasts we like?
Yeah, we could do that. We could add that. I didn't make a list of podcasts that I usually listen to during this, but we could do that.
What are some that you would enjoy these types of games with?
Let me check my podcast feed, but I do listen to games podcasts. Like I think yesterday I was playing Monster Hunter Wilds, which is not on my list, but I was playing that while listening to a podcast about Monster Hunter Wilds. The McElroys, The Besties, their podcast where they talk about games. I was listening to that yesterday. I would say more often than not these days, I will put on a TV show as opposed to a podcast.
Oh, really?
Like I was watching, I like to put on Taskmaster or like, Red Dwarf or something like that in the background.
Oh yeah, that's great.
But I do listen to some history podcasts. So we were talking about this like probably a couple of weeks ago now, but I listened to a podcast called The Rest is History, and the other one is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. And those are like the hardcore history in particular is like super long. So it makes sense to, if you need to eat some time, you want to put on a podcast like that. So I would say I listen to those. What else? What other podcasts do I listen to? I don't know. Name some podcasts that you listen to.
I mostly almost exclusively listen to comedy podcasts. So probably my favorite one is Comedy Bang Bang, which I listen to every week. And then also like the Doughboys, which is kind of a fast food podcast. I'm a Platinum Plate member of their Patreon, so I also get their doubles they do. I will also listen to Threedom, which is kind of Comedy Bang Bang adjacent, as well as sometimes I'll listen to Scott Hasn't Seen, which again is, I'm kind of in the CBB universe since I subscribe to, I don't remember what it's called, but I subscribe to like the CBB feed, so I get like access to all those exclusive podcasts. But other than those, I used to listen to way more, but I really just don't have time anymore because I really only listen when I'm driving.
I was gonna say I've pared down the amount of podcasts I listen to.
Oh, I listen to Get Played, which is a video game podcast that I think is pretty good. And then
I used to listen to a lot more podcasts, and these days I've pared that number down quite a bit. But
I also listen to the Adventure Zone whenever it's a good season.
yeah, I thought about mentioning that one, but I feel like for a podcast like that, I want to pay a little bit more attention to
that.
it.
Almost, you don't want to play a game with,
So that's one that, like, if I'm gonna go walk and like get steps in, or like do a workout or something like that, I might put that on because it's easier to pay attention to, and I don't like miss as much stuff. But let's get into the list, though. Hit me with your number 5.
Well, so I took a kind of a trip down memory lane for this because I tried to think like what did I do this with? And in college, or actually slightly after college, right when I got into the working world, I downloaded a game that I played a ton, and it had great music. It had a great loop of music, but that was one where I also would just like throw on I would listen to like 3 podcasts in a row and play this. So I would do huge long sessions. And that is a game called Polybridge. Have you ever heard of this game?
No.
A great little game. I guess there's been like 4 or 5 sequels to it, and it's also available on like iOS. Like I think it's you can play it on touchpad very easily or with the touchscreen. But it's a game where you basically just build bridges, and then cars go across them, and you have to make sure the bridges like don't fall off. And it's like super duper relaxing, and there's no like ticking clock because you can just like the cars don't go across it until you say like, okay, this bridge is good to go. So you can spend a ton of time making these intricate bridges, and eventually they have to also like they incorporate like drawbridges and like suspension, and you have to do crazy things with the cars, like make them go over loops and stuff. But I would sink so much time into this game, and I would burn through like, this was like, Comedy Bang Bang, I think I got into it in like year 2 or something. So I had a ton of backlogged episodes to listen to. And so I would just throw those on and build bridges. And now there's like Polybridge 2, 3, 4. I think there's been a ton. But it's a great little game to just like zone out to. But that's my number 5. What's your number 5?
My number 5, and maybe you will think of this as sort of blurring the line between like being too action packed and being like a proper podcast game, but I have No Man's Sky.
Oh.
I think it works as a podcast game because a lot of the time you are just like flying your ship around and you're like gathering resources and stuff like that, and you're just building stuff. So you will occasionally get into combat, but it's usually not like, it's not Call of Duty, so it's not like something that is going to steal your focus so much that you can't also pay attention to a podcast at the same time. So yeah, I enjoy playing No Man's Sky. I think last year when I got back into No Man's Sky over the summer, I would, especially on the weekends, I would spend like probably a couple hours just like trying to run the expedition, whatever was out with No Man's Sky. And I was just like burning through podcasts the whole time. So it was very fun. So that's my number 5. What is your number 4?
So this is kind of a catch-all. What I have for my number 4 is retro FPS. And what I mainly did with this is did you ever play the game Blood?
No, but I think you've talked about it on the show before.
I think I've talked about Blood before. But this is a great game. This and like Doom 2 or Hexen, stuff like that. You can get these games for super cheap on Steam, and they are extremely story light. And also, these are games that could be played muted if you wanted to, because there's not really like sound cues either. But I would sort of just kind of like speed run through blood levels while I was listening to podcasts, because the movement is really solid, and the shooting is really nice and precise, and you can do a bunch. Like you can throw an axe and hit people with an axe, which is very cool, I think. But I loved to just like run through these levels while playing, and it's like it doesn't sound like it would be chill, similar to like kind of No Man's Sky, where you are like getting in combat sometimes. But it also is like a game where all the enemies, I mean, it's an old style like Doom 2 game, so they're not like running at you. They're sort of just like slightly animating towards you, because they're sprites. But I had a lot of fun playing. I think the one you can get now is called like Blood Fresh Supply or something, is the one that's available on Steam. And it has like some quality of life features from the old game. But any type of like retro, I would even maybe throw that Ion Fury into this, because I did listen to podcasts while I played that. But that one you did have to stop sometimes because there was somewhat of a story. So like the newer games where they're incorporating like, well, it looks like a retro FPS, but actually there's like stuff going on, I would say maybe don't work as well. Really just like classic stuff, like again, like Doom 2 and stuff like that would be, or like the master levels or whatever, are, I think, great games to just throw on a podcast to and just kind of run through. Have you ever played a classic FPS? What's the oldest FPS game you've ever played?
I mean, stuff on Nintendo 64, but I don't know if we consider that. Like,
did you play Doom 64?
No, I think the oldest, my very first FPS ever was GoldenEye.
Oh, wow.
So that's probably the furthest back my FPS experience goes. So no, I've never, they call them boomer shooters now.
Oh yeah.
It's never been my genre, but
what's your number 4?
My number 4, and this is another one that I think it verges on being too action-packed, but I'm going to call it's almost a little bit more of a category, but it's sort of Vampire Survivors likes.
Oh yeah.
So the one I guess I will pencil in as my pick for this would be Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, because that's the one I played so much of last year. But I've also played Halls of Torment and, of course, Vampire Survivors. But last year, and I guess I didn't mention this as one of the podcasts I listened to, but as I was getting into the Bond books, there are a couple of YouTubers out there that talk about like the Bond franchise, and they've done these sort of like hour or two long conversations where they talk to each other about different Bond movies and kind of go through them. And it became like a fun thing for me to do, to just like put on one of those sort of podcast style episodes on their YouTube channel of them just like reviewing / talking about different Bond movies. And I would play through Deep Rock Galactic Survivor for like hours at times. And so, yeah, I play a lot of these. I think you probably could put them on mute and still like listen to a podcast and pay attention to what's going on in the podcast while also playing the game, because you're more or less just moving a character around. But it can get intense enough at times that maybe you sort of lose focus on the podcast. So that's why I think it sort of verges on not being a great example of a podcast game, but I think you can still enjoy them alongside your podcasts. So that's my number 4. What is your number 3?
So I was, longtime listeners will know that I was, or I guess short-term listeners, but I was playing Factorio with a group of my friends, and we made it to basically the final level, or the second to final level. The final level is pretty difficult to get to, but Factorio is a great game to play with friends, but also it's a great game to just chill out to. I've said this before, I think, on the podcast, but it is like playing modded Minecraft, where Minecraft is great, but you're not really working towards anything. I mean, you're basically trying to kill the Ender Dragon, I guess. But Factorio, you really just like you can plan stuff out, and you are collecting resources for a reason. Like you're eventually trying to get off the planet and then go to other planets. And there are parts where like enemies attack, but you can also play it on peaceful mode with no enemies if you want to, which I've not tried. But I do have a single player game that I have been playing because we have not really hit a wall, but we've gotten pretty far in that shared game we have, to the point where I'm not really sure what else there is to do besides optimize everything. And so my single player game, I'm really just like, I learned so much from going to all the other planets, and now I know a lot more how to play the game. So I'm trying to do a much more efficient, interesting factory. And then also, I mean, it takes time because you have to kind of build things up. And so it's a great thing to play podcasts to, because it's super chill and you're engaged, but not enough where you're not listening to your podcast. I can't recommend it enough. I guess I should put... This is maybe Factorio plus modded Minecraft, because I think both of these things, I guess Minecraft can get a little more hectic and like during the nighttime when like there are monsters around, but both of these I think are solid, just like open world chill out games that I would recommend. What's your number? What do you want? 3?
Yes, my number 3 is Loop Hero.
Oh, this is my number 2.
I was gonna say we've talked about this game a lot on the podcast because we both really like it, but it is sort of the perfect game to just like, it almost plays itself, but you have to interact with it every now and then, just like swap out gear. And yeah, you're just gathering resources and then going back to the hub area and building up your base, and then going back out and doing another loop and trying to take out the boss at the end of the loop. And
it's so good. I just looked at my Steam. I have 30 hours in Loop Hero, and I've never gotten to the third boss. I've just played the first 2 levels of it.
Yeah, and I played it a bunch initially on Steam on PC, and it's great to just like be able to click around on it, but it's also playable on Steam Deck, so I played it some there. And then they added like the ability to like move your save over to Switch, and so I started playing it on Switch as well. So I've played it on multiple different platforms, and I think it is on Android as well.
Yes, it is. It's part of Play Pass or whatever. So if you subscribe to Play Pass, which I don't know why you would, you can play it for free, or not free, but it's part of that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think it would be good with a touchscreen as well. But it's like, so if you were even just like putting on a TV show in the evening on like Netflix or something, as we all do at some point, you could just sit back on the couch with either your Switch or like an Android tablet or something like that and click around. And it's just like a very fun game to keep going with, and you can definitely still pay attention to a podcast or a TV show while you're doing that. So
it was my go-to for such a long time, and I've dropped off of it recently because I've been playing my number 1 a lot recently. But but yeah, Loop Hero I can't recommend enough. I wish I was better at it. I feel like both of us kind of hit that wall where we can't figure out why we can't get to the third boss. And I think it has to do with the camp. I think I'm building the camp wrong, but I also don't know how to fix that, or if I even can fix that. Like, I don't know. I need to watch a tutorial about it.
Yeah, I think to an extent it gets a little grindy to a point where you do just kind of have to run loops gathering resources and then bail out before you take on a boss until you have built up your camp just right. And sometimes it's just like, well, I didn't get what I needed, to be able to actually survive if I did fight the boss. So I think there is an element of grind to it as well. But
speaking of pixel art, like we were earlier, this also has beautiful pixel art.
Yeah, really nice pixel art. I actually really like the soundtrack as well for like music that is sort of old timey, like retro style.
Oh yeah,
video game music. It's pretty great. So yeah, I guess I can jump into my number 2 since because that was my number 2. So what's your number 2? It's sort of a little bit of a cheat because it's 2 different games, but it's it's SteamWorld Heist 1 and 2. But basically, these are games I guess there is a little bit of dialogue that you can skip through, but like nobody really cares about the story in these games. It's really more of that like 2D style XCOM turn-based style game. When I played these games, I would put on a TV show and just have it run episode after episode, and I could just be sitting there playing. I think did I play it on Switch? I don't even remember now, but yeah, it's super. I think turn-based games are like great examples of podcast games, because at any point you can just like, you don't even have to look at the screen. You can just like turn away and see what's going on in like whatever show you're watching, or just like pay attention to your podcast for a second, and then you can go back to it and it's still waiting for you to make your next move. So turn-based games are great for that as well. And I had a lot of fun playing both SteamWorld Heist 1 and 2 while listening to podcasts and watching TV shows. So I think I recommend them if you enjoy that style of like sort of turn-based strategy, almost XCOM-like, but they're sort of 2D. I recommend them. And I think I know what your number one is, and I think it's also my number one.
Should we say it at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Balatro. Hey.
What a game it is.
It is. It is a great game. And it's another one like Loop Hero. You can play it on a tablet or a mobile device, and you can play it on Switch, or you can play it on Steam. And it's super addicting, but also kind of like I was talking about with a turn-based game. The game waits on you to make your next move.
It does.
You don't have to pay super close attention all the time.
If you need to quit out of it also, it just like saves your place. This is the thing I loved about, we were talking before we started recording about Into the Breach, which is another great game that would fit into this.
Yeah.
But Into the Breach is great because you could just quit out of it whenever you wanted, and it would immediately drop you back to right where you were. And Balatro is the same way, where if you need to quit out right in the middle of a run, that's totally fine. It'll save your progress, and you can hop back in whenever you want to, which is great.
Yeah, and a lot of card-based games I think would be good for like podcast-style games. And this is definitely one of my favorite card-based games I've ever played. I know you're not...
Probably my favorite card-based game, I would have to say.
I was going to say, you're not usually very hot on card-based games, which is why I think it took you a little while to get into this one. But...
there was a period of time where I was kind of into Hearthstone, but then I realized that Hearthstone was mostly about trying to get you to spend money to buy packs.
Yeah.
I really liked that style of Hearthstone, which I think was called like the Arena, where you basically had to build your deck right before playing out of cards that you didn't own. It was just like a random assortment. And then you would play against other people. That I thought was really fun. But I don't like the concept of like building the perfect deck for whatever reason. That's not fun to me. But with Balatro, I mean, there's so many different ways to play. Like, there's the classic decks, there's the plasma deck, which is very interesting, and you sort of have to like more worry about how many chips you're generating. There's the erratic deck, which is just like infinitely replayable because there's so many different combinations you can get. I really like the Ghost deck, where you start out with one of those hex cards and you can make your first Joker polychrome. There's like, it's just like infinite replayable, and you can go up the stakes, and there's like rental Jokers and infinite Jokers. There's just like, it's such a complex yet simple game, and you can just like sink so much time into it. And I mean, I read an article once that was like, Balatro is the closest thing we've come as a society to creating time travel, because you really like, once you lock into it, you're just like in it, and all of a sudden like 2 hours have passed.
Yeah, and it's so easy and so quick just to get into the next run. And like you said, it doesn't feel like you're locked in for the entirety of the run if you do start one. So you're like, I can quit at any time. And then you just end up keep playing because you don't want to stop. So it does end up being like a major time sink, not in a bad way, but in a, this is so fun, I can't seem to stop playing. But yeah, it is another game that you could probably play on mute and just
Oh yeah.
listen to a podcast or put on a TV show or something like that. And it's great for that.
Great to play on a couch also. I mean, you can throw it on your phone and be watching TV.
Yeah, you can hang out with someone else and just like put on a TV and you're just like chilling out and playing on Switch or on. I've been playing it on my Android tablet, so I'll play it there every now and then, and it's great. It's great for like just sitting back on the couch. Any honorable mentions? I was going to say it seems a little strange to not have any farming sims on this list from either of us. I guess I would throw out stuff like Rusty's Retirement or Animal Crossing, both of which are great podcast games.
I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but when I first got into listening to podcasts, the thing I played the most was Sonic and Knuckles on Sega Genesis. I would just throw the podcast on, and then I would play Sonic and Knuckles on my computer and just like burn through those levels. I could beat it. I got down to beating it in like, I think like 36 minutes or something. And then I would just do it over again. Like, cause a podcast is more than 36 minutes. So I would just like beat it completely, start over, beat it completely again. So like retro games, like Sega Genesis games, these are things where you don't need to listen to them because there wasn't really story. But things where you can just kind of like burn through them, I think it starts to get a little more complicated maybe around the N64 era when there was actual like 3D environments and they were trying to do storytelling a little more. But it's like I would say like classic 2D games, like SNES games or Sega games, I think are perfect for this if you want to try that out too.
I also think there's something to just like an open world game where you can go explore. They're a little bit on the verge of having like too much dialogue and story to be considered technically and sometimes too much action to be considered technically a podcast game. But if you are just like playing Skyrim, for instance, a lot of your time in that game is just going to be exploring the open world and like going into a dungeon and killing draugrs and like gathering items. And you can definitely do that while listening to a podcast. And so I think there is still something to most open world games being like viable podcast games. But that's our list. So we had No Man's Sky, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, Loop Hero, SteamWorld Heist 1 and 2, and Balatro, and your games.
I had Polybridge, retro FPSs similar to Blood and Doom 2, Factorio, and then Loop Hero and Balatro.
Awesome. So check out those recommendations as games that you can play while listening to podcasts. But speaking of games we're playing, have you been checking out Apex again?
You know, I booted it up because I was like, I kind of do want to check this out. There was all that news about how there's going to be a big update later on after Battlefield, that like Apex 2.0 update. And I was like, I wonder how much it's changed. And it has changed a little bit. Like now when you like fly over, it does that thing that I think Fortnite does where all of the points of interest have like text above them, floating above them, which is interesting. And there have been a couple more quality of life things. I have only been playing single player, Zach. I've been playing the bot royale that they introduced, which is it drops you into a map and it's all bots and it's like half of the people. I think it's only like 24 squads or something. And it's very satisfying because I always win and there's only a little bit of difficulty and I can play like two of them and be like, okay, I'm good. I mean, it would be good, I think, to like, it's, I think, a good thing to use to like warm up if you really want to like try hard. But it's just almost a chill. It almost is a podcast thing, although you do need to really listen. So it's not really a podcast game. But I don't know if I'm ready at the point where I actually want to play real people again. But it was kind of nice and nostalgic to just drop back in and play against a bunch of bots and just like dominate them.
Do you get progression with that mode?
I did get a little bit of experience, and maybe it's just because I hadn't played in forever, but I played 2 rounds of it, and then I got a loot box I could open. But it seems like that's not going to happen again for a while.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready to jump back into Apex just yet, especially since I'm playing so much Marvel Rivals.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary to at this point.
But I would maybe come back once they launch that 2.0 thing.
Yeah, I think
Check
that'll
out
be
what's
interesting.
going
I'll be
on
interested
with
to
that.
see if
But
they put Titans in that game. That's going to be
Yeah.
insane.
yeah, I really want to hear what the major thing is that they're going to do to shake things up. I'm very curious about that. But for me, I mentioned Marvel Rivals. I'm still playing that. Played a bunch of that last night, trying to knock out some more challenges to progress the cosmetic unlocks in the Battle Pass. But that's just a fun game to play. Like once or twice, just like spend an evening knocking out some challenges and progressing. But learning new heroes every now and then too, which is fun. And I think people are getting really good at it too. I feel like I'm hitting a point where sometimes the level of competition, I'm just like, okay, I think the skill-based matchmaking could be a little better. I actually don't know what their matchmaking like algorithm is, but because sometimes it feels like I'm going up against like a pro level player, and it's just like I'm being dominated.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay,
Is there a hero that pro level players are circling around as like the most OP player?
I mean, I think you could make a case for several different ones, but I know like Winter Soldier in particular, if you go up against a really good Winter Soldier, he's difficult to contend with because he has like his gun hits so hard that like I had mentioned they added the Thing from the Fantastic Four, and I was running around trying to learn that character because I was kind of enjoying some of his abilities, and I ended up against a like really good Winter Soldier player, and he was just like killing me every time I saw him, and I would try to throw everything I had at him, and he probably had a healer close by, and that was why I couldn't take him out, but he would always kill me every time I saw him. And so I was like, maybe I'm just learning like, okay, this is like a good counter to this character, or this is a good counter to that character, and maybe that's what's happening. But there are definitely certain characters where you go, this character's play style is easy enough that just about anyone can pick them up and do fairly well. And there are some characters that are complicated enough that they're not as approachable for everyone. But when you see somebody who's really good at them, they will basically dominate the match. And I think Winter Soldier is sort of one of those types of characters, but there's probably several of them.
What I really want to hear about is Monster Hunter Wilds, which you have started playing.
Yeah, so I started playing it yesterday, and I'm still kind of going through the story of it, which is, not the reason you play a Monster Hunter game. I've been enjoying it, though. I'm playing it on PS5. It's getting mixed reviews on Steam, mainly for performance reasons. I think it's not doing very well on PC.
Have you noticed any stuttering or anything?
Not on PS5. It's running, I think, fine on PS5. It could probably use like an update to make it run a little bit better, but it's not like bad enough to complain about on console. I think it is exclusively like a PC optimization issue. And so people are sort of frustrated from that because you get mixed reports on, I have a low end PC and it runs like garbage, or it runs fine. And then I have like a high end PC and somebody's like, this is horribly optimized and this is bad. And some people are saying it's fine. But so I don't know what's going on with the PC version of the game, but I know there's frustration with that out there, especially since I think it was sort of a similar story with Monster Hunter World when that came out, and they're just like, oh, we're sort of experiencing that again. So they got to do work to fix the PC version of the game and make it run better. But beyond that, I think the game is fun. They've done more work to try to streamline things, and I think that's like both a positive and a negative, because you have like the long-term players of the Monster Hunter franchise that are like, I love how weird and sort of overly complex and needlessly complex it is at times. Like I mentioned, I was listening to the Besties podcast talk about it, and they put it in a good way where I think they said something along the lines of it's sort of like a weird Christmas tradition that you have that you don't necessarily love it, but it wouldn't feel like Christmas if you didn't have it. You know, there are a lot of things like that baked into the pie in Monster Hunter, and I think they have done a good job of streamlining some aspects of it, though, where like now if you get some sort of status element or ailment on you, you can just like bring up a little radial menu and hit a button to pick the one item out of my inventory that will fix this and just deal with it for me, please. And you don't have to like scroll through this like wheel
that sounds
of
great to
stuff.
me.
So they've done things like that to make it more approachable and easier to sort of get a handle on, which is great. So it's progress, but I don't know that they are necessarily fully there, because it's also a little bit one of those games where if you really want to understand how to use like one of the 14 different weapons in the game, that completely changes the play style of combat, because you don't have classes, you just pick a weapon, and each one is sort of wildly mechanically different from each other, which is why it is so much fun to learn and to like get really good with. But there's not systems in the game that will teach you properly how to use them. You basically have to go to YouTube and look them up and look up guides and be like, how do I use this? What are the deeper mechanics of using this weapon?
What are you using right now?
So the two weapons I used most in Monster Hunter World were the bow and the insect glaive. And so those are the ones I wanted to start out with this game. But since I'm still just kind of going through the story, I'm pretty much just using the bow. And I'm like, I'll deal with like trying out the other weapons, you know, once I get further into the game. And so I've mainly used bow. And it is still fun and interesting. They have some new mechanics for using the bow and using, I assume, any of the weapons, where now you can get like, if you damage the same sort of area of an enemy, it eventually becomes like a weak spot. And so you can now like hit one of the shoulder buttons to sort of like do a special attack on that particular area. And it I think in the past you had to like keep hitting the same area and you might break off a piece of it. And then that's how you can sort of gather different materials you need to, craft items, weapons and armor and stuff like that. And with this one, you sort of weaken a spot by hitting it over and over again. And then you can use like a special attack, and that will pretty much always break it, so that you can acquire those different pieces that you need. So they've sort of changed that a little bit as well. And you can like pop out a little grill to like cook a meal but that was like one of the big Monster Hunter things that people loved about Monster Hunter World was it's sort of Destiny like, where you have a hub area and you have NPCs that you talk to and pick up quests and stuff like that, and you gear up before you head out. And with Monster Hunter, you always cook a meal and eat it, and that gives you like a health and stamina and stat boost type of a thing. And you
have a cat.
You do. You have a palico, and the palicos were the ones that were cooking it, but they had this like really elaborate animation for cooking the meal and the guy eating it. And I think they've sort of taken that out a little bit. Like, you're not going to this like chef, this palico chef in the hub area and saying, hey, cook me a meal before I head out. But you can pop out this little like portable grill, and there's like a little animation for that. But I think that's some of the stuff that people are like, this is like the weird Monster Hunter stuff that I want. You can't take that stuff out. So there's maybe a little bit of a mixed feeling about some of that stuff. But But yeah, I'm not super far into the story just yet. I will say I like that even if you're playing offline, you can still call in support from other like NPC hunters, and they will join you, and it makes it so much easier because I played through. It's a little bit like if you play Elden Ring and you call in what were they called?
Not spirits. Was it spirits?
It's sort of spirit. I don't remember the terminology they use, but you would call in like a support character basically to help you fight a boss. In Monster Hunter World, I played through the entire like story without, playing in co-op. So I did it all solo. And then after I finished the sort of the story mode and got into the end game stuff, I was like, oh, I should have been doing this the whole time. It's so much more fun and easier to tackle these basically Dark Souls like boss fights with each of the monsters by having support characters to help you out.
Spirit Ashes.
Spirit Ashes. Yeah, but they didn't have bots that you could call in, so you had to play in co-op with Monster Hunter World. But with Monster Hunter Wilds, you can always call in bots to help you, and they're actually useful. Like they will steal aggro from whatever monster you're hunting, and then they actually make the whole thing a whole lot easier, which I think is another complaint that some like hardcore Monster Hunter people are having, is that the game doesn't feel as hard as past Monster Hunter games. But I don't know whether that's true or not, but maybe it's I was trying to decide if it was because I was more experienced with Monster Hunter now that I was sort of breezing through some of the monster fights, but I'm sure they will add more monsters and it will get more challenging as it goes.
Now, is it a change that in this one you have mounts, or did you have mounts in the last one?
You had mounts in Rise for sure, but I don't remember if they were in Monster Hunter World or not. But the mounts are different in this one. I think they looked very dog-like in Monster Hunter Rise. These are more like weird bird-like mounts, but that's another sort of area where they've streamlined things, where now you can pretty much say, I'm going to put a waypoint on my map, and I'm going to hop on my like chicken horse, and it's going to take me right there. Sort of, when you're playing Red Dead Redemption 2, you could just have your horse automatically take you.
Auto.
It just does that. And so you can just like sit back and text while you're waiting to get there, or you can look around, and you have this like sort of a like chain grapple thing where you can like gather items nearby as you're passing by. So you don't have to like actually steer over to them. You can just let your horse take you where you're going, and you can still gather resources. So that's pretty nice as well. So yeah, they've made, I think, a good number of sort of streamlined improvements that should make it more welcoming to new players, but except for the learning the weapons. I think that's still something you're probably going to have to look up on YouTube, and maybe they're comfortable with that. They realize that most people are going to do that anyway, so they don't have to like really flesh out the like tutorial system on how to use each weapon. But yeah, I've been enjoying it so far. I am very curious to see what the end game is like once I get there. I have also heard that some people have had issues with like how multiplayer works or is set up, where maybe it's them going through the story mode, or I don't know if it's necessarily with the end game, but joining up with people and then having like have your party split apart because of cutscenes and stuff like that. And I don't know, there's been some frustration with that. I haven't experienced it yet because I've mostly been playing offline by myself, but yeah, I've been enjoying it, so I will probably keep playing it and see how it goes.
Zach, I watched a movie last night.
Which one?
I watched Timecop.
Oh, really?
Which I feel like I maybe saw on Sci-Fi Channel. like when I was very young, and it was heavily edited, but I had never seen it. I haven't seen it probably in the last like 15 years. Have you ever seen Timecop?
No, but one of my favorite synthwave artists is called Timecop 1983.
A great Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. Maybe not my favorite of his, but great to watch a classic 80s movie.
Yeah. I have meant to, like, every now and then I'll think, you know what, I should do like an 80s action / 80s sci-fi marathon. And I think about the fact that I should watch that, especially since I'm a fan of Timecop 1983, but still haven't seen it.
That's the only thing I watched this week.
I did also play a little bit more of Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza. And
how are you liking it?
So I got to the point where you do take control of a pirate ship, and it's like, it's one of those weird Like a Dragon things where it's modern times. You have a cell phone. It's current year, but you're on like a pirate ship and everybody's acting like, you know, it's Pirates of the Caribbean. So it is like a weird thing, but it makes total sense for this franchise where like weird is sort of common. And so yeah, you get to, you know, steer the ship around, but it's almost like a driving game where you can drift as well. It's super arcadey is what I'm saying, but I haven't done too much exploration yet because I haven't had time for it, but I do want to play more of that game because it's been fun so far. Hopefully I will finish that game at some point this year, but I think right now the priority is probably Monster Hunter Wilds. So on that note, do you have any parting wisdom?
Zach, I have more news about tapirs.
Okay.
Would it interest you to learn that tapirs have 14 toes?
It's an interesting fact. Why 14?
Well, on their front feet, they have 4 toes per foot, and on their back feet, they have 3 toes per foot.
Interesting.
That's all.
Oh, I thought you had more facts you were going to hit me with about tapirs.
I'm going to parse them out, I think. For a while, my parting wisdom is just going to be tapir wisdom.
I did watch some like short videos on YouTube last week about tapirs after our conversation. And they are kind of just silly looking creatures.
I like the goofy Pokemon. I like a Psyduck. I like a Slowpoke. The ones that are just dumb. And these tapirs look like a dumb Pokemon to me.
What is so there's Drowsy, I think is his name. Is that the closest thing in the Pokemon universe to a tapir?
You know, maybe. It actually looks very similar to a tapir. Even if it usually walks on its hind legs, but a tapir, if it was to go 4-legged, perhaps it might actually be based on a tapir because it's got the nose.
Yeah.
It's got very similar eyes, and it has similar coloring almost because I think it's the Malaysian tapir has that like kind of two-tone where it's like white and black, and a Drowsy is kind of like yellow-brown in the same way. So you could be right. Yeah, Drowsy could be based on a tapir.
Yeah, they got that little trunk that they can use.
It's a very cute little trunk.
It's funny, there's a video on YouTube where I think it's a YouTube short where somebody's just like petting the tapir, and he's just like has the most goofy looking face where the trunk is sort of off to the side and he's sort of smiling and side-eyeing the person who's petting him. It just looks hilarious to me. But
I probably have seen that video.
I bet you have. Well, on that note, go ahead and follow this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and YouTube Music, and leave us comments and ratings, and yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.